better. Okay. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to Loet's work. I've known Loet hundreds of years, I think, and I have worked with him, and I'm working with him at the moment on an article for Triple Helix magazine. So I was pleased to be able to read this and understand most of it. I think I can't do the technical bits, so I'm starting from a position as an economic geographer without those technical skills. Now I've got a problem of moving on to the next slide now. Oh, technology, isn't it a pain?
Try your right arrow. Try your right arrow and see if that works.
Oh, there we go. Right. Okay. So I work at Beck University of London. Loet is a visiting fellow. He was a visiting professor, as so was Henry Etzkowitz. So we've got common interests in understanding how regions operate, how the triple helix works in different contexts. So the work that I've done in the past is looking at it from a geographical perspective in these different contexts in the UK, in Portugal, and in Gothenburg, and looking at those relationships between different spatial scales and the different organizations that are making things happen, the triple helix actors mainly, and looking at entrepreneurs within triple helix context. So we're looking at a process of change. So Loet's work has got a very strong evolutionary perspective. So we're looking at what's happening over time. And the Italian case is great for that, because he gives the historical context, he gives the political and economic context. So we're looking at these interactions and governance structures. So it was good to see some of these themes coming through. So this, in 2013, we at Birkbeck, we hosted the Triple Helix conference, and you can see then we didn't know what was coming, but we knew that there were globally the economy was facing significant challenges, unemployment, low growth, and you can feel this in Italy, that the story of Italy is full of exciting stories, but also worrying things happening at the regional levels, particularly at southern Italy then. So we were looking at then how the triple helix actors work together to address this question about the enterprising states. And I suppose we could ask the extent to which Italy is an enterprising state. And then after that, we produced this paper in Prometheus in 2014. And again, issues about unraveling what's going on in the world. What dangers are societies of different kinds facing within this? And you can see then the themes of footlooseness, of high-tech manufacturing and knowledge-intensive services, and embeddedness, themes that are present in the Italian chapter. And this level geographical scale is prevalent throughout this chapter. So moving on to the specifics of this chapter, then he's got these 3 data sets. And what was really interesting is when he talked about 2015, he dismissed 2008, 2009, said, oh, there's much the same, nothing much has happened. And I thought that was really interesting then. He's got all this data, and it was summarized in a sentence or 2. But it was interesting that he got this cross-sectional data. That is very, very important. It's not longitudinal, but he does take these variables and look at them throughout the looking at Italy. And it's got these issues, as I've already mentioned, about geographical scale, and the issue of whether you should look at Italy as northern, southern, and central. But the analysis suggests that you need to have Tuscany as part of the northern part of Italy, and it makes much more sense to look at the country like that. And he also ends up with the policy application and the necessity of understanding what the data is saying in order to be able to produce policies that are specific to the needs of particular regions. But then those of us in Europe and used to European policy, even those in Britain, are still sort of mindset is European policy with our own levelling up agenda in the UK. Okay, so he's looking at then the history of Italy, the cultural traditions, and I wasn't quite sure where he was going to go with this, because he mentioned the second languages in these two regions, and then it turned out that these cultural differences, language differences, have had a marginal impact on synergy in the northern regions. And he's looking at geographical scale and talking about how the Italian system is consistent with the EU NUTS 2 classification, and he's got all this data. And then the problem about the industrial district. So when I first came into economic geography, it was all about the third Italy. It was all about Emilia Romagna, and everything was so exciting. But he did make, there is this point about mythological, can't even say it now, making myths out of small enterprise spatial system. And I think Loet's work actually touches on that, but it maybe that could have been more fully developed. And I looked to see how Emilia Romagna is doing, and it's not doing terribly well, which is interesting, given that two other regions were doing had positive scores rather than that was negative 3.8 or something like that. And so he's raising these really complex issues about statistical data and admin units versus the reality of innovation processes that don't match regional and national boundaries. And he talks about that when he talks about the service sector and the sectors that are delocalized because they're so international. So the KIBS, the knowledge intensive business services, are all over Italy, but the knowledge intensive stuff is global, and it makes it more vulnerable. And then there's also this interesting point about the choice of regions, studying regions, and what kind of systems you would look at. And the function of regions is very different in different countries. So, for example, Italy compared to the UK. And we're also seeing then about the triple helix model and how it operates in different ways in different parts of the country, the north versus the south, for example, and how the universities engage with the firms in those particular areas. And so what's interesting, the way the paper is structured is he gets the interesting questions at the end of the chapter rather than the beginning. So I found the second half of the paper really stimulating. The first half set the scene, but it was towards the end that he really got to grips with some of the more interesting questions about system innovation systemsness and what the extent to which it's generated at various spatial scales, and this question about the regions carrying the function of their regional innovation organizers, some of the work that Henry Etzkovitz and colleagues has done, and then a point about redundancy and indicators of synergy. And then this is what he's given us, the historical perspective and the change in the role of the state, devolution to the regions, and what effect that has at reducing the R&D budget. It meant that the southern part of Italy was much more exposed, and it also showed then that even though EU cohesion policy came in, the retreat of national policy was far greater than could be offset by EU cohesion and structural funds. And we're seeing these two Italys and the divergence between the fortunes of the northern part and the south. And he makes the point about a weak national innovation system, that the triple helix elements of university and industry are either non-existent, or they don't work, or they're unorganized. And I've not seen it quite so starkly presented as it is in this chapter, because I know colleagues Daniele Occhibugi, Bert Beck is also Italy, and we never have that kind of conversation about how it works in practice, because we just know people in universities and we know that they have links with industry, but I've not seen it quite as boldly said about that, as in this chapter. So this is the methods that he's talking about synergy and redundancy. and he's got these 3 dimensions. But it is interesting, the data doesn't cover agriculture, fishery, and forestry, nor public administration. And I don't know whether that matters in the scheme of things, because where I sit in Oxford, the public sector's everywhere, and it's hugely important part of our local economy. And I don't know whether there is that same missing element in the data that's presented here. So this is the results, and I'm sure my colleagues are going to talk more about the contributions of the region and the difference between national synergy and the region synergy. And you can see the strongest regions, for example, Normandy become even stronger to national synergy over time. And it's the north that has this synergistic element to it, that it's really important. 1/3 of the national synergy when considered as one region rather than the sum of its from the individual parts. And again, this is the measurement issue to do with where synergy fits in, and synergy enhanced by focusing on high and medium tech manufacturing. And then these 2 metropolitan centers of innovation systems, so Rome and Milan. And maybe it's my understanding of Italy is from my colleagues live in and work in Rome and Milan rather than in Basilicata or Calabria. So there's that. So to finish off really about the policy issues that are raised in this chapter are very interesting, about need to understand boundaries, municipal, provincial, regional, national, supranational by sector, and by combinations of analysis and indicators. I think that there's a lot to be learned from this, but I don't know how much this is mainstream. Other people will have greater knowledge of how these indicators collectively are used by policymakers in Italy, in other countries, and within the EU. And so I like the fact that analysis was historically informed, that it explained selection selectivity, illustrated synergies on the triple helix model, although I think there should have been perhaps more emphasis on the triple helix model as a consequence of what the data showed, and the point I was making earlier about data deficiency, which may or may not affect the results. And that's where I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jamie?
Yes, I was just going to ask, are there any clarifying questions, or shall we move to our next presenter, which is Jerome Warren? If there are no questions, Jerome, Dimitri, did you raise a hand or?
Yes, thank you very much. Just a very quick question to Helen. If you can comment a little bit about this notion of synergy, because I understand this is very much very special to Loet's communication approach to regions, and it's not a concept that we all understand the same way. I mean, for example, if you now talk, if you refer to synergies or policies in Brussels, you will get a completely different view. So, and I was wondering why, for example, this concept, as Loet had measured it at regional level, didn't really advance in mainstream regional policy to, so for example, as other concepts that we know have occupied center stage, as for example, the concept of smart specialization in our day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to see you, Dimitri. So my understanding of synergy is fairly limited. It's not one that I use on a day-to-day basis. So as far as I understand it, it's the extent to which the sum of two parts is greater than the whole. It's how different aspects reinforce each other, but I'm not sure whether that's the way that he's using it in this concept and in this particular context. So I think somebody else might have to do it. And I find redundancy is also a difficult concept. I've asked my mathematician husband to explain that to me, and what he suggested that is when you've got two parts of say the triple helix doing the same thing, so there's wastage in the process. So in the way he's explained to me, redundancy is the opposite of synergy. So in the one you get more by putting together, and redundancy is when you have bits that are left over.